Aw, damn it. Way to be late to your own special, Katie. I knew I shouldn't have taken that left at Albuquerque. Hey! Excuse me, could you tell me how to get back out onto the highway? Okay, you could have just said no. Yeesh. Hello, darlings. Countess Katie here. The feline freak who will make you shriek. Hey, pipe down, lady! Can't you see I'm trying to do an intro here? As I was saying, welcome back to the second annual RBComics Halloween special. And with any luck, you're actually watching it on Halloween. We're doing something a little bit different this year. Instead of focusing on Halloween-specific movies, we're swan diving into that stagnant septic tank of cinema we call made-for-TV horror, and seeing what kind of treasures we can come out with. Who knows, maybe someone lost a wedding ring down the disposal again. And where better to start than at the beginning? That's right, kids! Pull on your polyester and bell-bottoms, we're taking a field trip to the 70s. Well, 1969 to 1979 to be perfectly accurate. As such, a lot of these movies survive by the good grace of blurry VHS rips and the dedication of TV archivists like TV Terrorland, Chris Johnson, Newcastle After Dark, and many more. So here's to you guys. Thanks for keeping these gems available for weirdos like us. Cheers. This year, I'm going to be highlighting movies that are about as old as television itself. I would have liked to have done my top 5 best and top 5 worst again, but, well...
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
So instead, we're gonna focus on the ones that didn't bore me into an early grave. With that, here's the top 10 best made-for-TV horror movies of the 1970s. Sheesh, can you get any more niche than that? Number 10, Daughter of the Mind, ABC, December 9th, 1969.
0.8.
Okay, folks, cards on the table. This one is mostly here because it's weird. I can't say I've ever seen a premise quite like it, and it's the perfect time capsule for all that Cold War paranoia. That doesn't mean it's bad, it's just very, very different than what most people are expecting from their classic ghost stories. Dr. Constable, and no, that isn't a dual title, recently lost his daughter in a car accident, and now apparently spends all day hanging around cemeteries. While driving home, his daughter's ghost appears to him in the middle of the road and nearly causes him to crash. So stick to what you know, I guess. While he is dazed and confused, she complains about being dead and says that she has to go. So, yeah. Thanks for stopping by to nearly kill me and deliver that important information, honey.
Oh, Daddy. I hate being dead.
I know, and I don't care.
A colleague recommends constables seek out Dr. Alex Lauder, psychologist and ESP specialist, to help him sort out his paranormal predicament. At first, Lauder says that he can't do it for 5 days because he has to go to Switzerland, but then he just abandons that plan and moves in with Constable and his already distant wife. And everyone's just cool with that? I mean, why not? Apparently they already have Mrs. Constable's chiropractor and his daughter living with them, so the more the merrier, I guess. Because this house isn't crowded enough, a random couple shows up claiming that they have a message from Mary. Because, you know, Debbie's got that Jean Grey brand super ESP.
Is it weird that this is kinda turning me on?
Yeah, trance. Right. They hold a seance that looks more like an AA meeting, and Mary's ghost appears just long enough to repeat some of the same stuff she was saying before, including a cryptic message for her father to stop what he's doing. And she makes a wax mold of her hand with her fingerprints. This is enough for most people in attendance, but some military higher-ups aren't so sure, because a spy could be anyone at anywhere at any time.
Somebody from the other side, all right. The other side in the Cold War. They're experts at defections and subversion. They use prostitutes, kidnapping, homosexuals, blackmail, phony morality, religion.
Wow, what a subtle commentary on social phobias at the time. Maybe next year we'll just cut out the middleman and do an entire special on McCarthyism. But after all that patriotism, it couldn't really be spies, could it?
It is a gas which evaporates in a couple of seconds. They'll think young intellectual, working too hard, heart attack.
We used a little girl made up to look like Mary. She was smuggled into the country just for that one day.
Yes, it was spies all along, and now that we pretend to be ghosts, we catch moose and squirrel for fearless leader.
Words cannot express how much I hate communists right now!
Honestly, folks, I'm not going to pretend that this was an unexpected twist. I'm not going to pretend that Daughter of the Mind is a timeless cinematic treasure. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's a unique window into what lurked in the public consciousness during the time of the Cold War. Ooh, spooky Soviets! Whoa! That's why it's at the bottom of the list. It's certainly interesting, and it certainly wasn't the worst movie I watched for this special, but it's not gonna find its way into my rewatch pile either. Number 9, Duel. ABC, November 20th, 1971.
It's time to
Hey kids, do you like driving kind of recklessly? Well, if so, then here's the movie for you. Duel was the directorial debut of Steven Spielberg, whom, as you will know, went on to do nothing of note. But everybody's gotta start somewhere, and as far as starts go, this is a good one. The premise is not complicated. David Mann, a businessman, is driving through the deserts of California to meet a client. He's annoyed, but thinks little of it when a tanker truck cuts him off in traffic. Eventually, this pissing contest turns into a deadly game of tag on wheels with surprisingly few casualties. But the ones that we lost will be in our hearts forever.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out.
I think the funniest thing about this movie is that sometimes we're on the truck's side. David Mann is kind of a tool, and other than a lot of property damage, the only crime the trucker commits is herpicide. Meanwhile, the trucker has David so paranoid that he just threatens random people wearing cowboy boots, and causes just as much property damage. The cleverest thing he does in the entire movie is jump out of the car at the very last second to cause the truck to go over the edge of a cliff. But we don't even get an explosion!
Boo! No explosion! That sucked.
So why was this the number 9 spot on the list if all I've done is dunk on the premise? It's everything else. The way the film is shot, the score, all of it serves to ratchet up the tension and make this so iconic that it's been embedded into our collective pop culture memories. It's been parodied and paid homage to death. Even Spielberg refers back to it later in his career. The dinosaur noise that the truck makes when it goes over the cliff is the same noise that the shark makes in Jaws. Is this the most entertaining movie on this list? No. But it may be the most important. I still prefer this, though. Now that's comedy. And it's much better paced, too. Number 8. Gargoyles. CBS, November 21st, 1972. Not even close. But this one is more in line with what I was hoping to get out of this special. A TV budget creature feature that still manages to be suspenseful and spooky, up to a certain point, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Dr. Boley and his daughter are invited to New Mexico to do some vaguely scientific research. A man going by Uncle Willie wants to show them a skeleton he keeps in his desert museum. I'd like to take a moment to make a public service announcement. If an old man going by Uncle Willie says he wants to show you some bones in his shack, do not go.
Suck this one down, Uncle Willie.
Thankfully, all wee Willie Drinky wants to do is validate that his super realistic skeleton is a demon feared by the indigenous peoples of what is now New Mexico. But Dr. Boley isn't buying the Wish.com Halloween prop. But he's definitely here for story time. Unfortunately, an unknown creature attacks the shack before he can finish. The building starts to collapse, killing Grunklestan and sending the mystery shack up in flames. Boley and Diana try to escape with the unfinished recording and the unidentified skull, but the creature's next of kin swoop in and try to reclaim it. And what could impart the terror of a gargoyle attack like a crappy Casio MIDI drum? The horror! They flee to what looks like a Motel 5.5, where the landlady is very happy to see Dr. Boley, but he's got no time for room service. He's too busy traumatizing his daughter, playing the tape of Willie's death, her terrified scream, and the inhuman sound the creature made before it attacked and the building caught fire, over and over again. The next day, they try to tell the police what happened while leaving out some of the more monstery bits. The police drag them all back to the scene of the crime, where they find some punks riding dirt bikes near the charred remains of the museum. The fact that they are teenagers, I think, is enough evidence for Andy Griffith and the gang, but Diana is pretty upset that some innocent-ish people are in jail for something that they didn't do. Later that night, two much smaller gargoyles without horns or wings break into the motel room to try and find the skull. Dr. Boley gives chase, but frankly, I don't know what he was planning to do when he caught one of them. Luckily for him, Truck-kun comes in with an assist, and one of them is killed. The living one grabs the skull and bails, and Dr. Boley scoops up the newly dead monster and drags it into the motel room, because that worked out so well the last time. Diana goes back to the police station and tries this whole explanation thing again, but neglects to mention the gargoyle. She tells the leader of the pack, though, and he laughs in her face when she says she'll get him out. Why is she trying to help this guy again? Meanwhile, a couple more gargoyles come to claim their fallen comrade. Who could have seen this coming? The Boleys push the body out the window and try to hide it in their trunk mafioso style, but the gargoyles are gonna make them an offer they can't refuse. Mostly because they knock Dr. Boley unconscious and steal Diana in true Bride of the Monster fashion. Now, this is where the movie goes from pretty good to so bad it's hilarious. Back at their cave, Diana gets a crash course in gargoyle biology.
Ah, the return of the Y-boner. With a vengeance.
No, not like that, you pervs.
And like that, you've lost me.
She just learns that they take like 500 years to incubate, and some of them can't breed. It seems to depend on whether or not they have wings. So pickings are kinda slim. To get a leg up on the food chain, the leader of the gargoyles wants her to teach him from some random books he found in Dr. Boley's car. She reads a passage about getting groped by a demon, and the gargoyle assures her that he has no interest in humans. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's not what it sounded like 5 minutes ago. Even the female gargoyle doesn't buy it. Dr. Boley wakes up fresh from his undercar nap and convinces the police to let the bikers out to help search for his daughter. And they do, for reasons. Even the horny landlady and her little friend help, for reasons. But they don't last long. The landlady is found hanging from a telephone wire, and her little buddy is nowhere to be found at all. The posse continues out into the desert, where they meet a horde of gargoyles. They rumble, and both sides lose a few. In a fit of equal parts jealousy and stupidity, the Queen Gargoyle leads Dr. Boley to his daughter and helps them both escape, while the leader of the bikers pours gasoline all over the unhatched eggs. Luckily, the biker doesn't make it out unscathed. He's attacked, and he decides that if he's going to hell, he's gonna take them all with him. And nothing of value was lost. Except, you know, the last hope of a dying species. But survival of the fittest, right? When the leader of the Gargoyles realizes that he can't win, he takes his mate and bails out. But not before Dr. Boley smashes her wing with a rock, in thanks for all her help in getting his daughter back. Gee, I hope sticking it to your man was worth the extinction of your species and a broken wing. You go, Gargoyle. It's obvious that a lot of time and money went into this, even if they could only afford to make one gargoyle fly. But the makeup is a lot better than you'd expect from this kind of movie. And they managed to use the whole don't show the monster tactic really well at the beginning. It's not until the gargoyles start talking that this thing really starts to hit the skids. On a more personal note, I had to review this movie, not only because it fit the criteria of this list, but because it scared the crap out of one of my favorite English professors when he was a kid. Hi, Professor Johnson! Number 7. Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. ABC, November 9th, 1971.
Jerry, get out of the booth, take all your clothes off, and fold yourself 12 times.
Do you guys remember that episode of The Golden Girls where Blanche, Dorothy, Rose, and Sophia catfish a dangerous sexual predator? No? Me neither. But we got pretty close to finding out what that would have looked like with Do Not Fold, Spindle, or Mutilate. A side note about that title, it probably doesn't make much sense to anyone born after 1990, but before that, computers used punch cards to handle data processing. The instructions do not fold, spindle, or mutilate were to prevent the card from being altered in such a way that would make it illegible to the computer. But Katie, I hear you ask, what does that have to do with old ladies and serial murder? Absolutely nothing. Other than they use a computer dating service to catfish this guy, and that it sounds kind of violent. Welcome to Movie Naming Conventions 101. The film opens with 4 senior gal pals having lunch at a diner. Since computer dating is novel and weird at this point in time, they decided to be a gas to create a fictional girl and post her ad online, just to see if anyone responds. And they do! 2 whole letters. God, can you imagine what this movie would be like if they tried to remake it today? Swipe left, dearie. That one owns more sunglasses than shirts. One of those letters was from this guy, who goes by Mal. Gee, I wonder if he's the bad guy. In case you needed more evidence, he assaults a woman the first time he's on screen, and then has a full-speed, zero punctuation internal monologue about how he, quote, just doesn't get women. And since Reddit won't exist for another 40 years or so, he decides to give computer dating a try too.
Weird, maybe. Yeah. Maybe she's a weird chick.
Yes, I'm afraid the irony is lost on him. But despite his, high standards, he gets pretty invested in the fictional girl the women create, even going so far as to track down her telephone number. The ladies decide to keep the gag going by promising him a fake date where they wait to see what he looks like. Except that when he rolls up, he takes a hooker home by mistake. When she asks him to pay up at the end of their session, he assumes the entire thing has been a scam for cash and kills her in a fit of rage. The next day, the ladies read about the hooker's death in the paper and recognize her as the one Mal took home from the bar. And for once, for the first time in any of these movies, they go tell the police. And the police actually believe them. So that's it, right? End of movie. Nah. They do their own investigation, independent of the police.
Teen Girl Squad! Cheerleader! So-and-so! What's your face? The ugly one!
What, you didn't think it would be that easy, did you? Mal tracks down the address connected to the phone number he used earlier and finds a retirement harem. But he's not here for silver foxes, and threatens them all with death if Rebecca doesn't show up, despite being told several times that Rebecca isn't real. Finally, these ladies have had enough of his shit and pick up things around the house to beat him with. He tries to flee, but trips over one of them who had fainted moments earlier. Before they can arsenic and old lace his ass, the police show up to cart him off. This was an absolutely wild ride. And no, it wasn't gory or even particularly scary, but I enjoyed it for the premise alone. And it features stars of stage and screen Helen Hayes and Myrna Loy, so sometimes it has that crazy vaudeville energy. ABC even liked it enough that they gave it sort of a loose spin-off called The Snoop Sisters, starring Hayes and Mildred Nelwick in similar roles. I highly recommend both. They're not going to keep you up at night, but it's still a good time.
Hello, my name is Milton.
Number 6, Kild Dozer. ABC, February 9th, 1974. Wow, the 1970s must have really had the hots for vehicular homicide, because we're back on the road with Kild Dozer. I'd actually thought that this film had a more widely known presence online, but it turns out that most search results are for Marvin Heemeyer's real-life Kild Dozer. But that incident happened in 2004 and has no bearing on this film. So that means, once again, RBComics is at the forefront of talking about movies everyone else would rather forget.
Go Team Stupid!
Would you get out of here? Kild Dozer is an adaptation of a short story written by Theodore Sturgeon, published in 1944, for Astounding Magazine! The short story inspired the film, and the film inspired an issue of Marvel Comics' Worlds Unknown. That's right, neckbeards, Kild Dozer is part of the Marvel Universe. Maybe they'll do a remake of this movie for Phase 44. The film adaptation starts out with rocks in space, crashing into an island off the coast of Africa. Sometime later, a construction crew is tasked with building an airstrip for an oil drilling company. When they're plowing up the ground, their bulldozer encounters the space rock, which apparently has its phaser set to kill. Before Mac bites the big one, he tries to tell Foreman Kelly about the blue light that killed him. But Kelly seems less concerned that an employee has just died and more that there is still work to be done. So he gets everybody back to work on the condition that they don't use the bulldozer until they figure out what's wrong with it. But Belton doesn't give a flying forklift about the chain of command and starts it up anyway. The bulldozer comes to life and starts making some really calculated moves. It takes out the only communication system, their shelter, and a lot of other incredibly flammable things. And it starts picking off construction workers left and right.
Shake hands with danger. Meet a guy you ought to know. I used to laugh at safety. Now they call me Three-Finger Joe.
Eventually it comes down to two men, Foreman Kelly and Dennis. While they're hiding, they crack jokes about putting the machine on trial for murder, and how other more common forms of execution might not work on it, until they realize they might actually be able to electrocute it. They rig up some metal runway mats and get the generator up and running, and when the bulldozer pulls onto the electrified plates, it seems to dispel the space alien ghost thing. Later we learn that Kelly is a recovering alcoholic, and this job was his last chance. He knows that no one will believe his story, but decides to tell the truth anyway, for reasons. I went into this expecting an atmosphere befitting a goofy-ass plot, like evil construction equipment kills workers. But it was a surprisingly tense and even kind of emotionally driven film. There was still plenty of silliness to be had, mostly in the form of editing, but if you go in expecting goofy effects and bad acting, you might actually be a little disappointed. But taken for what it is, Kild Dozer is actually not a bad watch. We will return to TVPG orgy of blood and mediocrity right after a word from our sponsors. Then you can see more of my boobs!
Hi there, how you doing? What has RB Comics been doing this whole time?
Boobs! Number 5. Trilogy of Terror. ABC, March 4th, 1975. Trilogy of Terror occupies kind of an odd spot on this list because I imagine a lot of people will recognize the cover and maybe some of the third segment, but nothing else. It ran on television for literal decades, so imagine being like 10, up way past your bedtime, and you turn on the TV to find this. Did I unlock a core memory? Well, let me tell you about what happened before that. It's worth noting that all of these segments are based on short stories by Richard Matheson. The first, Julie, opens up with these two losers, Eddie and Chad, hassling co-eds on a university campus.
Some wool dress? Hi. How you doing? Math class, huh? Oh, there you go. Oh, your coat's terrific.
Awkward.
Yeesh. More like Trilogy of Cringe. When their literary professor strolls by, Chad just knows that she's a sexy librarian type and wants to go for it. But his pal Eddie thinks it's a bad idea. But who cares what he thinks? He's not even in this movie for a full 5 minutes. During class, Eldritch seductively plops herself on the desk, and a bit of thigh sends Chad into fantasy land. After class, he makes awkward small talk and shoots his shot, and is shot down himself. Dauntless, our hero, creeps up on her house to watch her undress. What a winner. To further illustrate his charms, he has a philosophical book discussion with Julie on their way out of class.
I guess some people enjoy violence, lead perverted lives. And speaking of perversion...
Stop the tape now. Will Julie, A, spray him with mace and flee, B, swing him by the dick into oncoming traffic, or C, accept his date invitation to the drive-in movie? Well, class, what have we learned? Besides the fact that roofies give root beer a bitter aftertaste, Ms. Eldridge succumbs to the drugs, and Chad books a motel room for an impromptu photo shoot. Now, the wiki article on this movie says that he just takes pictures of her and drives her home, but I think perhaps there's a bit more to it than that, unfortunately. He demands to see her again using the photos as blackmail, and says that the police won't believe anything she tells them. Now, I'm no legal eagle, but I think there's a metrical fuck ton of evidence to the contrary. However, none of that matters, because, surprise, this was her plan all along, I guess. You see, Ms. Julie Eldridge is some kind of sexy telepath and planted the idea in Chad's head from the very start. So all that hemming and hawing she did was for sport. But now she's bored, and according to her...
You see, I'm bored. And when I'm bored, the game is over.
Game over, man! It's game over!
To prove it, she flips the table by poisoning Chad's drink and burning his house down. So, the average winning Monopoly strategy. Then she adds his name to her book of conquests.
That's going straight in the fucking book!
I honestly think that this one is the weakest of the three. Chad is certainly a disgusting, desperate douche, but the whole teacher-telepath thing comes off as kind of out of nowhere and a long road to travel for some non-con kink. But let's all just stop and take a moment to appreciate that this guy's name is literally actually Chad. I guess it was always a cursed name. The next segment, Millicent and Therese, is about a pair of sisters who are forced to cohabitate despite hating each other more than the average siblings. Each of them has one personality trait. Millie, seen here in her Judge Judy cosplay, is such a prude that even the Puritans would think she's uptight. Meanwhile, her sister, Therese, is constantly on the hunt for fresh man meat.
I don't care for man meat.
Millie even accuses her of seducing their father when she was 16, so that's how you can tell we're dealing with some pretty unreliable narrators here. Millie tries to convince Therese's boyfriend that she's a Freudian murder hoe for Satan, but he's only a little convinced. She calls Dr. Ramsey to tell him that Therese is getting worse. Ramsey comes over to find out what all the fuss is about, and sees Therese lounging around in an outfit that's actually not super revealing by today's standards. She tells him that Millie won't talk to him while she's in the house, flirts with him, and then tells him to hit the bricks. Later, Millie calls Ramsey back and says that she's got a way to deal with Therese. She's gonna use her own vaguely voodoo for dummies against her, and collect some fingernails and some hair, and oops, all Millie. That's right, gang. Millie was Therese all along. Or rather, Therese was Millie all along. Apparently her name was Therese Millicent Larimar.
What a twist!
While the twist may perhaps be a little obvious, it isn't uninteresting, and the segment is shot in such a way that it could cast some doubt on the idea. If nothing else, it raises a lot of questions and theories, like the idea that her father's sexual abuse might have caused Therese to develop an alter to cope. If the segment had been a little longer, I think it might have been able to explore that further. Finally, we come to the most memorable segment in the movie, Amelia. 2 fun facts before we get into the story. The original title of the written work was Prey, which I think would have been a cooler title than Amelia. And apparently this segment was so spoopy that it couldn't be shown on TV in Brazil. So the whole thing was chopped off and the movie was retitled something like 2 Horror Stories? Not nearly as catchy if you ask me, but maybe it sounds more menacing in Portuguese.
Duas histórias de terror.
It is not.
The titular Amelia brings home a birthday gift for her new boyfriend Arthur. It's a Zuni fetish doll! But before you pervs start Googling it with your safe search off, fetish in this instance just means that it's a focus for spiritual magic. Like when you stick pins in a doll that looks like your 6th grade English teacher because she said your Macbeth diorama was too inappropriate for school. Not that I would know anything about that. Anyway, Arthur's birthday happens to be on the same night that Amelia and her mother go out every week, so she has to break the bad news to her that she won't be taking her out. Amelia's mother tries to emotionally manipulate her into breaking her plans by being one long sob story, but Amelia resolves to spend Friday night with the man she loves. For 5 whole minutes. But before she calls Arthur to punk out, she drops some exposition on Mama Munchausen.
Supposed to be some Zuni hunter's spirit inside of it. And there's a golden chain wrapped around it to keep the spirit from making the doll come to life.
Her mom is like, "Cool story, bro," and hangs up to let the guilt sink in. Incidentally, the lady who voices me found this unfortunately relatable. Barely a minute after the hang-up, Chekhov's gold chain falls off and the Zuni hunter is free! I really appreciate that in these early stage encounters with the doll they use the don't show the monster method, right up until... From then on it becomes a game of tag, where the doll tries to stab Amelia and she runs into another room and shuts the door. But much like the average velociraptor, it can open doors! Amelia tries drowning it, packing it, stabbing it, and smashing it. But the only thing that seems to work is fire. Geez, how high did she have that oven cranked up to? Much like other heroines in her position, Amelia opens the oven to see if it's dead and takes in a big lungful of Zuni hunter. Now she waits for her next prey, her dear old mom. So, in a weird way, it's kind of a happy ending. If you spent this entire section going, "Wow, Julie, Amelia, and Millicent look really familiar," it's because they were all played by Karen Black.
It's Karen Black!
Who's best known for her performances in this movie and being Mother Firefly in House of a Thousand Corpses. So, they can't all be winners. Trilogy of Terror has 2 sequels, one official and one unofficial. The official one, Trilogy of Terror 2, didn't come out until 1996. The unofficial one came out much sooner. So soon, in fact, that it appears later on this list. So stay tuned. Number 4. The Horror at 37,000 Feet. CBS. February 13th, 1973. Fasten your seatbelts and put your tray tables up. It's going to be a bumpy ride. The Horror at 37,000 Feet is widely considered by fans to be the worst thing that William Shatner has ever done.
Slowly. Out and spin.
You should stop singing right now.
Oh yeah, kids, the bar's real high. Fortunately, there are other people in this movie, and none of them sing. A famous architect and his wife are transporting stones from an abbey that her family holds claim to. But unbeknownst to them, the foundation stones were pagan. Gee, there's nothing poignant about that at all. The only one who seems to have any clue is Mrs. Pinter and her awesome dog. Unfortunately, he's not cool enough to ride in the people part of the plane, but I'm sure that'll change by the end. After her dog is stowed away, everyone starts to board and is greeted by the worst-dressed flight attendants money can buy. Seriously, what the hell are they wearing? After takeoff, things start getting spooky when Mrs. O'Neill starts hearing voices in Latin that seem to hypnotize her into just kinda strolling around the cabin. Luckily for her, they have a doctor of everything, apparently, to help settle her down and take a crack at translating what she's saying. Here to help with the translation is none other than... Not in this movie, you're not. Instead, he's a failed priest who's lost his faith before becoming a jaded, cynical alcoholic. Gee, this character could get his own cable drama. While they're trying to figure out what's wrong with Mrs. O'Neill, the flight staff is trying to figure out who's been playing with the damn thermostat. Ice has started to form all over everything in the cargo hold and up into the back of the plane. As if that weren't chilling enough, the pilots lose control of the plane like it's in a huge storm, only to be told that it should be smooth sailing. The plane starts flying around in circles, but in order to try to avoid a panic, the staff proceeds with business as usual, until Mrs. Pinter's dog is discovered frozen to death. I told you he'd be cooler later in the movie. Too soon?
Boo! You suck!
Well, he's not alone. The other staff and passengers start to die off or be injured by the frost permeating the plane, and Mrs. Pinter reveals to the remaining passengers that the Abbey stones the O'Neills brought aboard still belong to the druidic old gods, and their list of demands is pretty short. A human sacrifice, specifically Mrs. O'Neill, and to be returned from whence they came. At first, the other passengers think that they can trick the gods with a little girl's doll, but when that only seems to piss them off, they consider throwing the little girl in for no extra charge. She wasn't traveling with anyone, so that's an option until the mob decides that this is all kind of Mrs. O'Neill's fault anyway. Eventually, the hysteria devolves into lighting a fire on the fucking plane, at which point Mrs. Pinter's brain determines that it would rather be in a coma than watch one more moment of this stupidity. Gee, I wish I'd thought of that last year. The fire only seems to piss the gods off more, and everybody starts filing towards the back of the plane. Father Shatner wants to have a peek, just to see if it would restore his faith, and ends up on a crash course to find out if there's an afterlife. So, what we've learned here is, don't fuck with druids, and William Shatner just shouldn't fly. Apparently, sending a priest to his maker was enough of a treat, and the gods allow the flight to proceed as normal, and everyone lived happily ever after, relatively speaking. Despite constantly conflating druidic practice with satanic black masses, this movie manages to be tense, well-paced, and has some really great performances. You can't deny that it is a truly unique setting, and offers an interesting spin on the haunted house or possession subgenres of horror. I mean, how many other horror movies can you name that take place on a plane?
I have had it with these monkey-fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane!
Does that one even count? Number 3. Salem's Lot. CBS, November 17th to the 24th, 1979.
Salem.
Oh boy, here we go. Before anyone runs to the comments going, "But Katie, it's not really a movie, it's a mini-series," my rebuttal is, it's my show and I'll do what I want. Most of these Stephen King minis are binged and packaged as whole movies now anyway. Speaking of King, I have a bit of a horror hot take. Stephen King is the George Lucas of horror. What do I mean by that? He's a great idea guy, but when it comes to staying focused and landing a story, he kind of trips at the finish line. I know. Heresy! But I'm sure you'll see my point after this jaunty 3-hour vampscapade. After the commercial success of Carrie, producers were dying to get a hold of the rights to King's next book. At first, the idea was to adapt the nearly 400-page book into a feature-length film. George Romero was even approached to direct. But after it was announced that 2 other vampire films would be coming out the same year, Warner Brothers decided that wasn't happening. So, the television division picked up the project and handed the screenwriting over to Paul Monash, who had not only produced Carrie, but had also been writing for television for years. Romero backed out, citing that he wouldn't be able to make the film the way he wanted due to strict network censorship guidelines. So the producers enlisted the help of a young Toby Hooper after seeing his work on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It seemed like a slam dunk. A lot of things were changed between novel and screen, combining some characters, completely rewriting others, all while trying to stay faithful to King's source material. Since this is starting to turn into an essay rather than a review, I won't point out any of the changes unless they are particularly interesting. Man, this preamble was almost as long as the review.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
Okay! For some inexplicable reason, we start out mise-en-scene with this holy water GPS tracker thingy that tells you when vampires are near. I'm half expecting an "I bet you're wondering how we ended up here" kind of voiceover. Instead, we jump back to 2 years earlier, when Ben Mears, a successful author, comes home to his New England town of Salems Lot, Maine. Wow, this sounds eerily familiar. He's come back to write a book about a supposedly haunted mansion that scared him as a child, and in trying to rent the property discovers that it's already been purchased by Richard Straker. He and his silent business partner Kurt Barlow want to open an antique shop in town. Disappointed, Mears rents a room at a boarding house and strolls through town, where he meets Susan, who happens to be reading one of his books. He strikes up a conversation with her, and the two agree to meet for a date later. I'm still not sure why. Mears comes off as kind of a condescending ass and just looks really damp throughout the entire movie. Like, he's just constantly sweaty. But since there's no accounting for taste, they hang out, and she even invites him to have dinner with her parents, who aren't really impressed with him either.
What's his book about?
Well, his latest one, it's about, 2 men.
Not one of those.
While all that's going on, the movie switches focus to the affair between Crockett, the local real estate agent, and his married secretary, Bonnie. They mix a little business with their pleasure and arrange to have a delivery made to the mansion. A massive crate that Straker claims is a sideboard. Bonnie's husband is supposed to be the one making the delivery, but manages to convince 2 independent laborers to do the job for him. He knows that there's something going on between his wife and her employer, and he's determined to catch them in the act. And how can he not? Apparently everyone in town knows.
He wants Boom Boom Bonnie to think he's gone to Portland. As a matter of fact, Crockett himself set up this trip.
Bonnie decides she's gonna make it easier for him by inviting Crockett back to her place so they can make it in her marriage bed. Hot stuff. But before they can get past the foreplay, hubby kicks in the door and points a shotgun at them. He tells Bonnie to wait while he marches the realtor into the living room and menaces him. Eventually, he lets him go, assured in the knowledge that he'll never do that again. And he's right, because he's dead. The next day, Mears goes to visit Mr. Burke, an English teacher who inspired him to write. Mr. Burke is directing the annual Founders Day play, starring Mark Petrie. Mears and Burke go have dinner later where they discuss the Marston Mansion and the inherent evil that keeps drawing Mears back to it. Smells like another Stephen King trope to me. Around the same time, Mark has some friends over to his super sweet room to practice their lines for the play. Their mom calls and wants them to come home, so they set out through the spooky New England woods. The littler one is picked off and made a sacrifice to unseen forces. Police don't find his body, but his big brother Danny is found scared stiff and catatonic. But only for like a few hours. When his little brother returns as the screensaver of the damned!
God damn it!
After Danny's funeral, the gravedigger is filling in his grave by hand. You know, for the personal touch. He starts hearing voices that he can't find the source of, but what he does find is his dog, dead. But before he can get him to the pet cemetery, Danny's here to convince him that sometimes dead is better. Danny must be the strongest vampire in this flick, since the noonday sun does nothing to curb his appetite. After he's finished with the gravedigger surprise, Danny heads over to his buddy Mark's place for dessert. But Mark's seen enough horror movies to know where this is going and refuses to let him in. But that's okay, his mom's always got something hot and waiting. At this point, Mears, Burke, and Susan's father, Dr. Norton, are getting pretty suspicious of all this bloodless death. And their suspicions are confirmed when Danny's mom wakes up at the morgue and attacks Mears, who fends her off with this stunning display of arts and crafts.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit that I have ever heard.
That shouldn't have worked. Why did this work? Practically everyone in town is a vampire now, and it's all been leading back to Straker and Barlow. Oh my god, what is that makeup job? It looks like the haunted mask in Nosferatu had a baby, then threw it down the stairs.
It's like every nightmare I've ever had fused into one, cloned itself, the clone, and then made those!
This is the biggest departure from King's original work. Originally, Kurt Barlow was suave, cultured, and spoke in complete sentences. But producer Richard Cabritz thought that there was no way to make that happen. In an interview with Cinefantastique magazine, he said,
"We went back to the old German Nosferatu concept, where he is the essence of evil, and not something romantic or smarmy or, you know, the rogue-cheeked, widow-peaked Dracula. I wanted nothing suave or sexual, because I didn't know it would work. We've seen too much of it. The other thing we did with the character, which I think is an improvement, is that Barlow does not speak. I just thought it would be suicidal on our part to have a vampire that talks. What kind of voice do you put behind a vampire? You can't do Bela Lugosi, or you're gonna get a laugh. You can't do Reagan in The Exorcist, or you're gonna get something that's unintelligible, and besides, you've been there before. That's why I think the James Mason role of Straker became most important."
That all may be true, but was this really the best you could do with $4 million? Regardless of how he looks, Barlow proves that he's no slouch and straight up kills Mark's parents right in front of him. Mark swears revenge right to his face, but I can't believe it's not Orlok is preoccupied with the priest. The two of them have a showdown while Straker interprets.
"I'm a priest. A priest. Throw away the cross. Face the master. Faith against faith."
It's because he didn't make it out of tape and popsicle sticks, isn't it? Meanwhile, Mr. Burke takes care of his newly vampirized gravedigger friend. But rather than become a vampire himself, he has a heart attack and is removed from the party, leaving Norton and Mears to handle things on their own. Or so they think. Mark, who's the real hero of this movie, is already breaking into Barlow's house and plans to kill him himself. And he would have gotten away with it too if it hadn't been for that meddling Susan. Man, this movie would have been over an hour ago if everyone had just let Mark be Mark. Aspiring magician, escape artist, and monster enthusiast. But instead, they get captured. Straker whisks Susan off to have a private dinner with Barlow while Mark unties himself, like a boss. He runs into Mears and Norton, who showed up late because they had to read the Dracula Spark Notes to figure out how to kill a vampire. But Straker is in no rush to get to the climax and thinks Norton should just hang around. Mears is a little more eager to speed things along and just straight up shoots Straker multiple times. He has super strength and maybe a bunch of other powers, but repelling bullets apparently isn't one of them. Mark and Mears make their way to the cellar where they finally confront the king of vampires.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets!
Unfortunately, there are no giant bats or blood tornadoes, but with the budget, perhaps that's for the best. They managed to put Barlow down disappointingly easy with a little cuddling before Mears shows him Mr. Pointy.
Dad, that's his crotch.
Oh, sorry.
With Barlow dispatched, the other vampires give chase for a couple feet. Mears and Mark set the mansion aflame, but Susan is nowhere to be found. As they ride off into the night, the wind sweeps the flames towards town, and Mears remarks that the flames will purify and cleanse the town of Salems Lot, driving out all the vampires in hiding. He leaves out the part where a ton of innocent people and pets die, but those guys were never on screen, so who cares about them? You'd think that'd be the end, right? Barlow is dead, the town is in flames, and Mark now has an unfortunate new role model. But we wind up right back where we started, where they're in the church gathering the holy water that glows when a vampire is near. They head back to their shack to get their stuff to bail out, but Susan wants to pick up where she and Mears left off, so he slips her some wood before he and Mark hit the road again.
Don't let your kids watch it!
If you were playing along at home, we didn't quite get a Kingo. Damn. If only we had had some ghosts or some awkward sex, we would have made it. There was a lot of plot to cover here, and it was full of characters who were important in some parts and then dropped off the face of the earth as soon as their purpose had been served. It also jumped around erratically between storylines, which made it tough to talk about without reordering some things. While the movie has some really great scenes, and I enjoyed the characters of Mark and Stryker, it took a lot of stamina to watch this all at once, and even more to write a section about it. But it was worth it. The music and atmosphere are perfectly suited to the story, and while I think the makeup effects may be a little goofy, I can understand the rationale of wanting to change Barlow's character up a bit. Unfortunately, the actor barely appears in the movie, much to his surprise and aggravation. Apparently, we got another Salems Lot miniseries in 2004, which I know nothing about. What I'd really hope is that they just dropped everything with Mears and we just got Mark, the Vampire Slayer. But I'm guessing that's not what happened, so I'll probably skip it. But if you haven't gotten enough small-town vampires, there's more to see. Number 2, Spectre, May 21st, 1977. No, I'm not talking about that Spectre. I'm talking about the Gene Roddenberry movie that is technically not a made-for-TV movie either, but rules were made to be broken and we break a lot of them. Roddenberry, whom you may recall created a little pet project called Star Trek, had a lot of other pilots that didn't do it nearly as well. In the 70s, he pitched a ton of occult detective dramas to networks which they just were not buying. Spectre was one such pilot, so he added a bunch of B-roll and some scenes that were cut from the original pilot and shipped it off to the UK for a theatrical release. Which makes it a movie cobbled together from made-for-TV parts. Loopholes, people, use them. Occult detective and criminologist William Sebastian is given a new case that involves a wealthy English family and demonic possession, so who better to call in for help than his best buddy Dr. Hamilton, who doesn't believe in the supernatural. When old Hammy arrives, he thinks that Sebastian and his housekeeper are just playing with him, even when a hot succubus shows up claiming to be their client, Anita Scion. Sebastian kills her with a book, but Hamilton conveniently doesn't see that part. Sebastian then has a medical episode and explains that he's been cursed by the demon Asmodeus, whom he thinks may have something to do with the Scion possession. Hamilton is not impressed, but agrees to go along with it anyway, because...
William, I love you like a brother.
Brothers. Right. Really though, these two are based very closely on Sherlock and Watson, and like many interpretations of the mystery duo, there's an undercurrent of attraction.
Mr. Hamilton? I'd heard that you two had broken up. No.
Well, maybe it's just me. Anyway, the two load up and head for London by plane, flown by Mitri, one of the Scion brothers. The engines fail over the Atlantic, but they manage to limp into London somehow. When they arrive, Scion's super not suspicious at all driver offers them a lift. But Sebastian has business with another occultist colleague first. Unfortunately, Asmodeus had the appointment right before his, and left him a little fired up. After an exploding succubus and a doomed plane ride failed to convince him, Hamilton could no longer ignore the gravity of the situation he and Sebastian have gotten themselves into. The duo finally take that ride to the Scion estate, where their host makes them very, very comfortable. But Anita can't get cozy while her brothers are acting weird. Her older brother Jeffrey, head of the family and suspected new form of Asmodeus, dismisses her concerns as paranoia and hysteria, while her younger brother Dimitri plays with the neighborhood dogs. So of course the investigators suspect that Jeffrey is behind the canine carnage, but surprise! Mitri was Asmodeus all along and was manipulating Jeffrey to gather supplies, grow the cult, and sacrifice their sister. Asmodeus has it all in the bag until he removes Sebastian's curse and offers him a position of power in the cult. My dude, you are literally a demon. Why would you remove his curse before he even agrees to join? After Asmo dumbass fails at his one job as the emissary of hell, Sebastian defeats him with, I don't know, willpower? Then he, Anita, and Hamilton ride off into the sunset. But not before old Hamilton makes one more succubus check. While he's doing that, Sebastian admires the painting he was gifted by Anita in lieu of payment. Wait a second. Eh? Could that be...
Asmodeus.
Nah. I really wish this had been picked up as a pilot. I think it could have been a fascinating show. But that wasn't destined to happen for a multitude of reasons. Not the least of which was Sig Young, also known as Brian Barr, the guy who played Hamilton, met, married, and later killed his fifth and final wife about a year after Spectre's premiere. Then he immediately took his own life. Despite the real horror surrounding the production and its cobbled-together nature, this managed to be a really fun detective story with some interesting supernatural elements. Number 1. Dead of Night. NBC, March 29th, 1977. From the people who brought you Trilogy of Terror comes number 1 on this year's list, another horror anthology entitled Dead of Night. Both films were intended to be backdoor pilots for TV horror anthology series, but neither of them got picked up. In fact, you can hear it just right about here.
This is the dead of night. It has nothing to do with time.
To the Twilight Zone.
A place that is just as real, but not as brightly lit.
Hear that, kids? That's what good TV used to sound like. The first segment, Second Chance, is based on a short story by Jack Finney. Although he wrote so many of them about time travel that I wasn't able to figure out which one this was. But it is worth mentioning that he gave us Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So let's have 3 for him! The segment follows Frank, a classic car enthusiast who buys a wrecked 1926 Jordan Playboy. The man who sold it to him says that it was ruined while its previous owner and his girlfriend were trying to race a train. So as you can imagine, it's pretty beaten up. Nevertheless, Frank gets it up and running so well that it literally travels back in time to when it was brand new.
That you can't drive into the past in a modern car, because there were no modern cars then.
Yeah, fuck your DeLorean! But he doesn't have time to enjoy his excellent adventure for long, because his car is stolen. Or rather, the original owner takes it back while he's out wandering around. He walks for 40 years back to his own time and tries to move on with his life. In doing so, he meets a new girl and starts dating her. When she brings him home to meet her grandparents, it turns out they had the car all along, and that he saved their lives by jumping in front of their car so that they missed the train. Now that's a sentence no one gets to use often. So, in a way, Frank got his car back and more. The second segment, No Such Thing as Vampires, goes back to a time before cars. A village surrounding a stately manor house is beset by vampires. Or is it? In a glorious twist that wasn't set up at all, it turns out the lady of the house being tormented by vampires is actually being gaslit by her husband, which wouldn't be so unusual for the time, except for the vampire part. So the lady moans and screams, and the servants spread rumors. But why would he do this, you may ask? Well, apparently it was so that he could summon his wife's lover, a professor of something, and pretend that he needs help in curing his wife. Instead, he puts Victorian Rohypnol in his drink, extracts some of his wife's blood, smears it around the professor's mouth, and puts him in a coffin in the cellar. Then this ice-cold revenge is served by the butler with a side order of steak, right through the heart. Man, this revenge plot is so convoluted even the Count of Monte Cristo is lost. But hey, this was written by Richard Matheson, who also gave us I Am Legend, so take that for what it's worth. I bet you're wondering, why is this movie even here? The first two segments were kind of middle of the road, so what's so special about Bobby? Well, in my honest opinion, Bobby is the best thing to ever come out of 1970s TV movies and manages to beat even the feature-length films on this list. In fact, Dan Curtis thought it was so nice, he used it twice, and recycled it for Trilogy of Terror 2. Which just goes to show it's true, Hollywood really is out of ideas. Things kick off with an expository phone call between Alma, Bobby's mother, and John, Bobby's father. But don't worry about committing either of those names to memory. Alma is just Mommy from now on, and John is Sir Not Appearing in this film. We learn that Bobby has died some time ago, and his mother is having difficulty accepting it. But luckily, she and Pamela Voorhees belong to the same Necronomicon book club, so she doesn't have to. After some thaumaturgic redecorating, she uses some oddly specific wording to ask the gods to bring him back.
Return my son who drowned by accident. By accident.
Pretty suspicion, I think, but probably just something in my eye?
Well, someone was convinced, because Bobby appears on their doorstep looking good as new. His mother is thrilled and promises to take care of him, practically doting on him, until he starts asking some leading questions.
Were you nice to me, Mommy?
Why are you asking me these questions?
Were you nice to me, Mommy?
After the question and answer round, it's time for the physical challenge, and Bobby's decided it's hide and go seek. First, it's Mommy's turn to seek. But when he fails to get the drop on her that way, he decides it's his turn to find her. He takes a malicious glee in narrating everything he's doing for her, letting her know how close he is with the sound of his voice. It's obvious he could find her at any moment, but is just messing with her, even pretending to be her husband on the phone.
Why are you say?
And then she pops him, and he doesn't take it well. Sick Jack Torrance impression. I guess you could say he hammered the point home. Then Mom decides it's time to put him down for a nap, permanently. But you can't count on an assist from the sea as your double tap, which Mom finds out the hard way. Then we get a full explanation of how Bobby drowned, which, if you think you know, hold that thought. It's darker than you think.
Bobby drowned himself to get away from you. You see, Bobby didn't want to come back, Mommy.
But wait, that's not all. It turns out that Bobby never came back at all. He just sent this thing back to his mother instead.
Damn it, Bobby, this just ain't right.
I love everything about this segment. The way that it's shot, the sound design, all the acting, 5 stars, 10 out of 10 would Bobby again. Don't get me wrong, the other two segments are both really good too. I think they both have a really unique spin to them, especially the vampire one. But Bobby is what makes this anthology worth it. Go check it out and see if you don't agree. Well, ghouls and fools, it's taken an extra year, but there's another Halloween special in the books for you. It's been a rough couple of years at RB Comics, but we are really striving to bring you guys some great stuff. Speaking of, if one dose of Countess Katie just wasn't enough for you per year, you're in luck! We're hosting a Countess Katie fan art showcase! Because Miss Atomic Bomb got one, and I am unquestionably, indisputably cooler than she is. And I have seniority, damn it! So send us the best fan art you can of me, for a chance to have them featured in a video with my commentary. Just keep the NSFW to a minimum, or PruTube will have my ass. Or won't, I guess. The deadline for submission is November 24th, so warm up those tablets. Voting on Patreon and Twitter will start shortly thereafter. And tune in next year for another Countess Katie's TV Terrorthon, where I'll see you in the 80s.